Star Trek Insurrection is the worst Star Trek movie. Or at least that's what I think. If you like it, I'm not here to tell you you're wrong. In fact, as movies go in general, I think Insurrection is pretty watchable. The direction is overall solid, there's some decent action, nice visuals, and of course the fantastic Jerry Goldsmith score. Despite the sluggish pacing and a truly bland set of supporting characters, Insurrection is okay to throw on in the background. This isn't going to be some red letter media video where I go through the entire movie beat by beat and nitpick the thing to death. However, what this video will explore is just how badly Insurrection screws up in terms of its themes, their development, and why they just don't work within the Star Trek franchise as a whole, or even within the movie itself. I'm assuming most of those watching are already familiar with Insurrection, but just in case you're not, or haven't seen it in a while, here's a quick refresher. The Enterprise is called into a planet home to a primitive alien race called the Baku because Data flips his shit and goes nuts. After getting Data back, they discover the Baku aren't as primitive as they appear, having once travelled the stars themselves and settled on this planet. Once settled, they discovered ionizing radiation in the planet's rings gave them incredibly long lifespans and good health for centuries on end. However, a Federation admiral and another alien race, the Sona, want to shift the Baku off the planet to harvest the radiation for themselves. Seeing this as a violation of Federation principles, Picard goes rogue in an attempt to save the Baku and stop the baddies. Now, if you're at all familiar with the film, you'll know Insurrection has a lot of hang-ups about advanced technology. The Baku are a race who chose to give up advanced spacefaring technology in order to live a simpler life on this world. And it's here we get into the major way in which Insurrection screws up its themes. Because the movie seems to want to say that a more basic, less technologically driven way of life is the superior way of life. This is illustrated to the audience in a number of lines of dialogue and also several visual elements. For one thing, the long lifespan of the Baku, which is thanks to the naturally occurring conditions of the planet, keeps the Baku healthy and relatively young looking. However, the Sona, who use technological means to extend their lifespan, come out looking like melted cheese. The beginning of the movie portrays Starfleet life as busy and too fast-paced, and life with the Baku as enlightening and pleasant. Picard's whole justification for going rogue is his objection to Starfleet interfering with the natural course of evolution for the Baku. There are numerous other examples, but in general in this movie, nature equals good, technology equals bad. This is not only complete nonsense, but also deeply idiotic considering this is a damn Star Trek movie. But that's not just because Star Trek features a lot of technology in its stories and setting. Star Trek doesn't just declare the opposite and say technology equals good, nature equals bad. The core idea behind Star Trek is more nuanced than that. Because you see, Star Trek is ultimately a romantic franchise. No, not like that. When I use the term romantic, I'm referring to Romanticism, the artistic and literary movement which swept Europe in the late 18th century. Now, I know you may be thinking, where in the fuck is he going with this? But I promise you it's relevant. You see, at the time, another movement was the Age of Enlightenment, which went hand in hand with the Industrial Revolution. Huge technological, scientific, and philosophical progress was being made across Europe. Every day felt like it brought new discoveries, new technologies, and new ideas. But amidst this progress, some depressing notions crept in. Instead of working in fields, on farms, people were suddenly trapped on production lines in smog-filled factories. Instead of gazing at nature in awe, all of its mechanics were being quantified and rationalized by science. I promise this has a connection to warp drive, hang in there. The Romantic movement was an attempt to preserve emotionality and individualism. It was a reaction against what many saw as the slow death of passion and beauty and wonder. And eventually these two movements collided in one of the foundational pillars of all of modern science fiction, Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. You see, we're getting somewhere now. I'm sure you're all familiar with the story of Frankenstein in general, but if you haven't read the novel, it's a bit different from the pop culture image of a story. Dr. Frankenstein essentially seeks to conquer death by creating new life from the dead of others. However, when he succeeds in this, he becomes horrified at his creation, and through some various mistakes and bad luck, the two become locked in a quest to destroy each other's lives. Frankenstein is totally a piece of Enlightenment literature because of its emphasis on scientific discovery, but it's also a work of romanticism. Dr. Frankenstein himself embarks on his quest to conquer death, not because he wants to write a paper or anything, but instead he's driven by passion. but it's that passion which fails him when he follows through with his experiment. The monster of the original novel is not really that monstrous. He's sympathetic and eloquent and only wants his creator to love him, but Dr. Frankenstein simply can't bring himself to do it because of his own fears. The novel essentially says, if only Dr. Frankenstein could see beyond to the monster's character and give him the love he desires, then disasters would have been averted. And so Mary Shelley presents us with one of the first formulas for science fiction stories that followed: a new discovery, the failure of empathy, and a new form of cruelty. So, getting back to Star Trek now. Star Trek essentially adjusts this formula slightly to arrive at its universe. A new discovery, the application of empathy, a new path to peace and prosperity. Star Trek shows us a future in which humanity's empathy evolves in tandem with its technology. Take replicators, for example. If they came about too early, they'd likely be sold as luxury products and dominate pretty much everything in terms of market share. Users would perhaps have to buy the patterns to synthesize new objects. But in Star Trek, when this technology came along, it was given out freely and effectively ended poverty, criminality, and likely had a hand in bringing about world peace. The creators of the technology recognized its benefit for the whole world rather than its benefit just for themselves. And this is what Insurrection gets so wrong. It views technology and empathy as mutually exclusive things. You can't have more of one without having less of the other. This is simply narrow-minded and doesn't even hold weight within the film itself. For example, the Baku as a people literally depend on the technology of the Enterprise to survive. They use transport inhibitors to stop people being beamed away, they use phaser rifles to take out the tagging robots, they use force fields to stop pursuit, they use the Enterprise itself to stop the bad guys from destroying the Baku's home, all used by the Enterprise crew out of empathy for the Baku's situation. The Baku were also only able to reach this Fountain of Youth planet thanks to the invention of their own warp drive. The long lifespans which grant them peace of mind and impressive mental capabilities would never have happened if they didn't leave their own homeworld in the first place. Which is why I present to you the dumbest thing ever said in anything Star Trek.
But where can warp drive take us, except away from here?
Warp drive took you to this place. It's thanks to warp drive you are living on the very planet you are currently standing on. But for Star Trek to treat this as a legitimately insightful and wise statement is honestly baffling. Where can warp drive take you? I have some ideas.
It unites humanity in a way that no one ever thought possible when they realize they're not alone in the universe.
And the men that reach out into space will be able to find ways to feed the hungry millions of the world and to cure their diseases. They will be able to find a way to give each man hope.
Now, there are a shitload of other examples to choose from, but this is a pretty big one.
To explore strange new worlds.
To seek out new life forms and new civilizations.
To boldly go where no one has gone before.
Insurrection's message flies in the face of a foundational pillar which Star Trek is built on as a storytelling platform. The Baku give up technology so they can live for centuries on a planet, accomplishing essentially nothing. Their way of life isn't a means for peace, it's a straight shot to stagnation. They have lived for 3 centuries on this planet doing pretty much the exact same thing. It becomes especially annoying when it's revealed the Sona are actually former Baku who wanted to leave the planet to, do something with their lives, and were exiled from their people because of it. So I guess when it comes to the Baku, it's their way or the highway. They literally tore apart families because some of their siblings wanted to explore space. The thing which Star Trek is pretty famous for. Now, the film does attempt to reconcile this very obvious problem with Data's arc. At first, the Baku are afraid of Data because he's an android, which is really weird considering they're already supposed to know what an android is, but by the end they're no longer afraid of him, and he gets to play in some straw. On this surface, this looks like the Baku making peace with technology. However, within Insurrection's narrative, this only happens because Data is told to act less artificial and more human. Essentially, he is told to be less technological and more natural. Now, I already know someone's going to bring this up in the comments, so I thought I'd tackle it here. What about the Kalvin timeline movies? Are you saying Insurrection is worse than them? You may call this straw manning, but I call it a direct quote from my community tab. So let's look at Star Trek Into Darkness. Once again, I don't think this is a very good film, but it's watchable. Its big flaw is resting its narrative on a complete non-twist which squanders the promise of the previous film, but even a movie as messy as Star Trek Into Darkness gets this technology-empathy relationship right. While it's not the core theme, a lot of the film's message is explored through the use of technology. This first comes up when Scotty gets angry at bringing on prototype torpedoes and he doesn't know what's inside them or what makes them tick. Scotty's empathy stops him from simply jumping on board with using a potentially devastating weapon. However, Kirk, who is super angry and driven by revenge, doesn't give a shit. Later, when Kirk comes around, they discover there are literal people inside the torpedoes. Scotty was worried about the human cost of these weapons, and it turns out his hunch was right. Admiral Marcus's whole plan to militarize Starfleet literally depends on asking a man who has previously been spoken of in the same breath as Adolf Hitler to design weapons for him. Why? Because Khan doesn't have the same evolved sense of empathy as the current Starfleet officers do. This is also why the USS Vengeance looks like a scary dark shadow of the Enterprise. It's what the Enterprise would look like if its designers favoured weaponry and firepower over the desire for exploration and the enrichment of humanity. Again, this film isn't very good, but it gets Star Trek right on a thematic level. It's just a shame about all the knockoff Wrath of Khan crap. When Star Trek examines this relationship between technology and empathy, we get some great stories. The Taste of Armageddon, The Measure of a Man. Hell, this relationship is right at the core of the recent Star Trek Discovery and Star Trek Picard. Remember the formula? Well, here's how it's been reinvented again in modern Trek. A new discovery, and the resulting conflict to make sure empathy doesn't fail. Which is a pretty cool spin if you ask me. Insurrection is the worst Star Trek movie. It's the worst because it's slow and it's bland, but also because it fundamentally misunderstands one of the cores of great Star Trek storytelling. The result is a message which stands on flimsy reasoning at best, and is completely counter to why Star Trek works at worst. Again, if you like it, I'm not going to flip my shit if you say so in the comments. Hell, this is my mum's favourite Star Trek movie, so I can't really get that mad about it. As I said before, this was more an excuse to open up some more interesting conversations about Star Trek's themes and its place in literary sci-fi. I hope these topics actually get some love in the comments. Paul R asks, what's your favourite piece of science fiction ever? Well, out of the 111 videos on my channel, 58 of them are about Star Trek, so obviously it's Blake 7. Thank you for watching. If you like my videos, be sure to subscribe and hit the bell icon to stay up to date on all my new uploads. Over on my Patreon, you can see videos early. Speaking of which, I'd like to quickly thank all of my patrons who are now appearing on screen. Have a good one, and as always, live long and prosper.